Hello everyone, and welcome to week 15 of English 120. This week you're going to begin drafting your research paper, and by the end of the week you'll be turning in your draft. We'll be reading The Valley of the Moon, Book 3, Chapters 6 through 11, and we'll also be looking at The Bedford Researcher, Chapter 14. This week we're at towards the end of your research project. You'll be completing your first draft. Hopefully it'll be a very completed draft that you turn in at the end of the week, and I'll be discussing what the requirements are for that draft. Then next week you'll be doing a peer review, and the following week you'll be turning in your final revised essay. So let's talk about how you go about moving from outline to drafting your essay. Much of the work for your introduction was done when you created your topic history in your research prospectus. An introduction should introduce your topic, it should frame your argument, and it should clearly state your thesis. Look at pages 237 to 240 in the Bedford Researcher for some specific details on how to write a truly effective thesis. Here's a sample introduction. Almost daily, headlines and newscasters tell us about athletes' use of performance-enhancing drugs. Indeed, stories of such drugs stories of such drug use seem to increase each year, with investigations of possible steroid use by college football players and even by Olympic gold medalists. It is easy to have the impression that many adult athletes, particularly male, may be using drugs in order to improve their performance and physical appearance. What may be surprising and even shocking to most of us, however, is that these drugs, especially anabolic steroids, are increasingly used by adolescent athletes, and that girls are just as likely as boys to be users. You can see how this sample introduction introduces the conversation that the writer is going to be joining about steroids, and clearly states a thesis statement that he or she is going to support and prove throughout the body of his or her research paper. Now, after you've written an effective introduction, then you want to draft 3 to 4 really solid body paragraphs. You want to use your outline to draft your document. You want to translate your bulleted list of topics into full sentences. And don't be afraid to change the order of your ideas if you need to as you're drafting. Remember, the more work you do in setting up your draft, the better your draft's going to be. Draft effective paragraphs by focusing on a central idea in each body paragraph. Paragraphs should have a topic sentence in which you make an assertion or offer an observation or you ask a question. You want to make sure you follow a pattern in your paragraph. You want to support the points you're making by supporting it with evidence from a source. You want to, each time you provide evidence from a source, you want to introduce your source by naming the author, establishing his or her authority on the topic, and by using attributions such as according to, claimed, expressed, reported, acknowledged, commented, inquired, said, stated, wrote, pointed out. And you always want to contextualize your quotation both before and after you use it in your text. The final sentence of your body paragraph should draw a conclusion based on the evidence you provided that supports the essay's thesis statement. So here's an example of a body paragraph. Given the potential cost in justice and national security, why hire contractors at all? Ironically, perhaps the most often cited reason for using private contractors is that using these corporations saves the taxpayer money, since the government can hire them on an as-needed basis and does not have to pay for contractors' training, health care, or pensions. Professor Alison Stranger at Middlebury College challenges this notion in her 2009 book, One Nation Under Contract, when she points out that nearly all private contractors previously served in the military meaning that many of them are receiving pension payments anyway. Stranger writes that the federal government is effectively paying double or triple the daily rate for their services. Therefore, the Department of Defense would actually save taxpayer money by reversing the trend of privatization. So let's look at this paragraph in more detail. The central idea of the paragraph follows an initial question. So the question is, given the potential costs in justice and national security, why hire contractors at all? And then it goes into the answer to that question. The third and fourth sentences use evidence from a source to show the real cost of hiring contractors. The author of the evidence is introduced, and her authority, or her ethos, as a source, is confirmed by mentioning that she's a professor at Middlebury College. The quote is contextualized before and after the quotation. Then the final sentence draws a conclusion that supports the essay's thesis statement. Between each of your body paragraphs, you want to make sure you use transitions. These are the words and phrases, such as however and on the other hand, that show the relationship between paragraphs and sentences. Transitions help readers understand how one sentence builds on another and how a new paragraph is related to the one before it. By signaling these relationships, they help readers anticipate how the information and ideas that are about to be read are related to the information and ideas that they've just read. So, if you look through this list, it'll tell you, if you're trying to help readers follow a sequence, you want to use the ones listed here. Or if you want to show a contrast between one paragraph and another, use these. If you want to elaborate, use these. If you want to signal a concession, use these. If you want to compare, use these. And if you want to introduce a conclusion, this should be right before you write your conclusion, you can use any of these. Speaking of conclusions, when you draft your conclusion, at a minimum, you should at least summarize the main points you've made in your paper, and tell us how these points support or prove your thesis statement. Remember, your conclusion is your last chance to leave an impression on your reader, and therefore it gives you a final opportunity to influence your readers. It's the last thing that we're going to read before before I give you your grade. So you want to make it a memorable statement. You want to take it to a higher level, meaning you want to bring in, you want to not only summarize, you want to explain the context of what you're talking about in relation to the world, in relation to our community. You want to really explain why, what you're talking about, the purpose of what you're talking about in the end. If you want some great strategies on drafting a conclusion, see pages 242 to 244 in the Bedford Researcher. Throughout your research paper, you're going to need to use sources effectively. You want to use sources to introduce an idea or argument, to contrast ideas or arguments, to provide evidence for your argument, that's the most important thing, to align your argument with an authority, by you'll have people supporting what your arguments, if you're using their established ethos. You want to define or if you can use a quotation to define a concept, illustrate a process, or clarify a statement. So how do you go about integrating sources into your draft? You want to use attributions, like I said before, to identify your source. So, for example, in this example below, Pamela Coke argues, and the word argues is an attribution. You also want to cite your source by providing the last name of the author, unless you've already provided it, and the page number in parentheses after the end of the quotation. So below you see the number 22 in parentheses after the quotation. You'll also notice that the period is after the page number and the parentheticals. Make sure you use your quotes wisely. Choose them wisely. You don't always have to put in a gigantic quote. You can use partial quotes where you use only part of a sentence or even a single word. Just make sure that all the words that are quoted are in quotation marks, and that source information is included at the end of the sentence. You can include complete quotations, one or more complete sentences. It's the same thing as a partial, same format. Or you can use a block quotation, and these are rare. That means there shouldn't be more than one in your entire research paper. This is when you have an extended quotation, more than 4 typed lines of text. These are indented 1 inch from the left margin, and there are no quotation marks around them. You do cite the source, last name, page number, just like you see on the quotation to the left. Some more information on using quotes effectively. Whenever you use a quotation in a draft, you'll need to first introduce a quotation, include the quotation, either partial, complete, or block, see page 253 or the last slide, and then you want to explain to the reader what the quotation means in regards to the point that you're making in your paper. For more information on using quotations effectively, see page 256 in your Bedford Researcher. You also need to include a works cited page. There's an example of a works cited page on page 361 of the Bedford Researcher. So this week, after you complete your draft, you're also going to need to complete your active reading journal. We'll be reading chapters 6 through 11 in book 3 of The Valley of the Moon. Now, they've gone, in books 1 through 5 last week, they began their quest, their final, they're going from farm to farm and learning all about different farming techniques. In this chapter, they're going to end up somewhere completely different, the beach. So, please answer the following questions. What was Saxon's reaction to seeing the sea for the first time in chapter 6? Who is the swimmer that they encounter on the beach? What are Billy and Saxon able to do for the first time in their lives at Bierce Cove? Who are the abalone eaters? Who first shows them the Valley of the Moon? Who was Venus, and why do the women compare Saxon to her? In chapter 11, Billy and Saxon are North Bay bound, but they end up somewhere else. Where do they end up, and who do they encounter there? Finally, I want you to explain how this quotation found on page 342 outlines the goals of Billy and Saxon's quest. What we want is a valley of the moon, with not too much work and all the fun we want. And we'll keep looking until we find it. And if we don't find it, we'll go on having the fun as we have ever since we left Oakland. Alright, so this week, here's the details on turning in your draft of your research paper. It's due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. As you know, your final research paper will be an argumentative research paper that explores the topic you presented in your project topic form. Your topic must be arguable and related to a topic or theme found in the Valley of the Moon. Format requirements. Needs to be 6 to 8 double-spaced pages. Needs to be in Times New Roman 12-point font. It needs to be in MLA format. See Chapter 21 of the Bedford Researcher. Overall requirements. Your paper must use at least 6 academic sources that are referred to using MLA in-text citations and that are listed on a works cited page at the end of your paper. You must use ethos, pathos, and logos to argue your thesis throughout your paper. Your paper must have an introduction where you introduce your topic, and you have a focused thesis that clearly states the topic you are writing about and the position you are arguing about this topic. Your paper must contain several body paragraphs that introduce subtopics that are proven with evidence. And your paper must have a conclusion where you clearly state how you have proven your thesis and communicate the purpose of your paper. Alright, that's it for this week, guys. Next week, we'll be moving on. You'll be doing a peer review of your peer's paper, and you'll also be reading chapters 12 through 17 of The Valley of the Moon. See you guys online.